All right, well, good afternoon. I hope you guys are doing well. We have kind of entered the sleepy time of the day. So hopefully you will stay with me and we can have some fun together doing this. Although this is a heavy topic, it's certainly a very important one. So my name is Ben Driver and I'm with Relationships Under Construction. And I'm going to ask for you to be a little bit interactive, and I'm going to do this basically like I do it in the high school. So you guys are all 9th grade students, all right? You get it, right? Okay, you are 9th grade, maybe 10th grade, right? And we are going to be going through this as if you were a student. Now, this presentation would normally be coming at the end of our curriculum on safe relationships and teen dating violence and that type of thing. And so, of course, we would start out by talking about this idea of abuse and how terrible it is, and how if you've been abused, you know, it really is something that you can get help from. So, you know, if you have been abused in any way, make sure to tell someone that you trust. But, you know, a lot of us probably have heard about addiction. A lot of us have probably been affected by addiction in different ways. And really, we can't give you all the information on addiction today, but we can give you a little piece of it. And what we want to do is give you information so that you, as students, can make the best decisions possible for your future. All right? I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not here to tell you what to think or any of that stuff. I'm simply here to give you information. And so today we're going to be talking about addiction in general. You've already heard a lot of good information on that, and we'll be reviewing some of that maybe and giving you some more information. But we're even going to be talking about addiction to things like pornography. How many of you in here knew that pornography could be an addiction? Okay, a good number of you. And it really can be. And a lot of times maybe we don't realize that, and we don't realize how serious of a thing pornography can be. But we're going to be talking about that, especially near the end of the lesson. So as I'm going through this and I'm talking about addiction, you might be thinking, yeah, but you know, why do you keep mentioning pornography? It's not a big deal. Well, we'll talk about that near the end, so keep that in mind. Addiction affects our relationships in so many different ways, right? It affects everyone around us. And probably everyone in here, either we have had someone in our family who is an addict, or we know someone who is an addict. You know, for each of these individuals, the disease significantly impacts at least 10 other people. That's a big impact on those around you, the majority of whom are in the affected individual's family. Addiction costs. It costs a lot. It costs health care, costs, insurance, criminal activities. No one escapes from addiction's consequences. When you see a word underlined like that, that means it is an answer in your worksheet, right? So if you want to get a good grade on this worksheet, you might want to be filling these out. No one escapes addiction's consequences, right? We live in the midst of an addiction epidemic. Addiction is a huge problem in our day and age. It's a big deal, and a lot of people are affected by it. So what I want to start by doing is talking about this idea of our brains and addiction. Right? Addiction affects our brains. It affects us in so many different ways. And there is so much information on this topic that, of course, we can only discuss a small portion of it today. But the reality is our brains are really amazing organs, right? They are capable of doing so many different things, so many wonderful things. But there are also some things that can negatively impact our brains. There are some things that can hurt our brains, and addiction is one of those. So we're going to play one of the videos that we have that gives you a small look into your brain's development.
When the pressure is on and you have to decide what to do you get time to process it? Never. The situation demands that you act immediately. Like when you're in the sky and things go sideways and your main chute gets all tangled up. There's no time to figure out what to do. You have to have a plan that you go over and over and over until it has become instinct. And this is asking your brain to handle a whole bunch of information and stress. And it's not as easy as it sounds. Some really smart brain guys ran a lot of tests. And they found that while a student's head is not getting any bigger, the brain inside the bucket is still growing. And there's a portion of your mental lobe right here called the prefrontal cortex. And it's one of the last portions of the brain to develop. And its job is to evaluate risk, to look into the future, and to help resist making bad decisions. So, whenever you're ready to make a choice, that's why it's sometimes difficult to assess the risk, because all of the tools aren't in the shed yet. That's why you can't rent a car, or drink booze legally, or even skydive.
I love that guy, don't you? So, as you're watching this video, what are some things that you learned about the brain there?
Not fully developed.
It's not fully developed yet. What else? Okay, so our reasoning, maybe our reasoning is not fully developed, and there are certain things we might do that are going to hurt our ability to reason properly. Anything else? Risk-taking, yeah. So our brains are not fully developed yet. At what age are our brains fully developed? Yeah, about 25. You know, it might give or take a little bit depending on the individual, but about 25. So if your brain is still growing at age 25, some of those things he mentioned are things that maybe you can't do yet, right? You know, maybe you couldn't rent a car yet. You know, maybe you couldn't buy alcohol or tobacco or something because your brain is not fully developed. And see, the reality is, as our prefrontal cortexes are not fully developed, our abilities to make the proper decisions, to be able to evaluate those risks, they're maybe not going to be as powerful as they would be when our brains are fully developed. So what do you think would be some consequences of possibly adding an addictive substance to a brain that's not yet fully developed? Okay, so it might stop the maturing of your brain. It might slow it down, and it might have an effect that way. What else? Yeah, so there's going to be a greater chance that you're going to have trouble breaking this addiction and this habit. Anything else? Yeah, you might not view those consequences. Maybe you weren't quite thinking about it clearly when you first started because maybe those decision-making principles weren't all in place yet. But the reality is that when we introduce an addictive substance into our brain while our brain is still developing, it's going to be harder to break the cycle of addiction. It's going to be harder for our brains to fully develop and mature, and it could even hurt us in the long run. So, really, at any age, adding an addiction, an addictive substance is a problem. But especially at younger ages, before our brains are fully developed, it can be a huge problem. It can be very difficult to break that addiction. So I want to show you here two brains. We've got a normal brain and a brain that is experiencing euphoria connected to cocaine. So actually both of these brains are experiencing some level of euphoria. But what do you see is different about these two brains? Okay, what's different about them? Okay, so there's more of the bluish color, and then maybe there's also more of the reddish-orangish color. I think. I'm colorblind. I don't know. But you can see these differences in the colors, right? And the yellow and red section represents that feeling of euphoria. So what's euphoria? It's good. It's exciting. It's joyous, right? It's something that really gets you excited. And it's that feeling of just, I'm so excited. I'm so joyful. But what you notice here is that the healthy, normal brain that does not have an addictive substance actually experiences more euphoria than the brain that is on cocaine. And the funny thing about that is, very often, people are going to that addiction because they want that euphoria, right? That's part of the draw to it, right? It feels good. Maybe it relieves some of the other issues I'm dealing with in my life. So I want that feeling of euphoria. But the problem with that is that over time, your brain's natural ability to feel euphoria starts to shrink. See, euphoria can be caused naturally by happy or exciting experiences, but also unnaturally by things like drugs and alcohol. So what is something that gives you a sense of euphoria? What's something you love? What's something that makes you excited?
Roller coaster.
Roller coasters, awesome. What else?
Good meatloaf.
Shopping, did I hear chocolate? Maybe. Shopping, maybe chocolate, roller coasters. What else? What makes you happy and excited? Video games, all right. So there's a whole host of things, right? And each person is different. But what happens is as our brains get accustomed to the easy euphoria it can get from drugs or alcohol, our brains stop feeling that euphoria with the normal things in life, with the normal things that made us happy. So shopping isn't really that fun anymore. Chocolate isn't really that satisfying anymore. Roller coasters aren't really that thrilling. Video games, they don't give me what I'm looking for because my brain has grown accustomed to that sense of euphoria that the drug or the whatever the substance is has given me. But over time, that amount of euphoria, it shrinks. It gets less and less. So that even though I'm going to this drug to get that sense of euphoria, it's never as good as it was in the beginning. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment with the next video that I'm going to show you. But here's what I like to say is kind of the bottom line, one of the most important things for you to get out of this lesson. And that is that addiction changes, I can't even say what I said was the most important. Addiction changes your brain, right? Addiction changes your brain. It has an impact on your brain. It is not just something that we do that has no effect. See, when we use drugs or alcohol to unnaturally get a euphoric high, it will take more of the substance used to get the same high each time, and often you will never get that same high again because your brain is being changed. Your brain is being altered. And we're going to see that in several different ways as we go along. So I'm going to show you this next video, and this is one of my favorites, and it's just this little cartoon that illustrates what addiction is, what it does. And as you're watching this, I want you to just think about, okay, what does this teach me about addiction? And I'll look for some of your responses after the video. All right. What are some things you learned from that? What's maybe something you noticed, something that jumped out at you? Yeah, it doesn't get better, it gets worse. What else? Changes a person, right? And you could see his behavior was changing in this video. His appearance was changing in this video. What else? It got darker, right? And a lot of times in addiction, that's what it feels like, right? You know, everything is getting darker and darker around you. And sometimes even other people can see that. What else? Yeah. You know, at first, he's walking up to, you know, whatever this substance is, and his first response is actually just to pass it by, right? And then the second time, he's a little more curious. You know, what is this thing? Maybe I'll give it a try. But then what starts to happen? He starts to run to it, right? Instead of it just being, oh, here's something interesting, here's a curiosity, here's something that might be nice, it becomes, here's something I have to have. Remember we talked about that sense of euphoria? It became something that he needed, or she, I guess, I don't know. This creature needed to feel that sense of euphoria. Anything else you noticed?
I thought it was interesting that it didn't take more. I don't know. I thought it was going to keep getting more and more.
Yeah.
Pushing them together until he had more or something.
Yeah, so, you know, maybe you didn't necessarily see the amount of it grow, but what you did see is that the high was lessened each time, right? And some of you were going to say something like that.
I don't know if I didn't. Maybe I'm just thinking it, but it seemed like the steps were slower. But then when they got closer to the drugs, and there was more of an initiation
Yeah,
to the drugs.
yeah. You know, there was maybe that, you know, that physical toll it took on him, but then when it came to the drug, you know, he wanted to go to it quicker and quicker. But yeah, you know, there's this idea that at first, you know, he soared up in the air. Everything was great, everything was wonderful, and you think, boy, I'd like to fly up in the air like him. But then he starts coming down quicker, he starts coming down harder, and I think it was the very last one he took, he doesn't even get off the ground. You know, he just kind of is there for a moment, and then he collapses onto his knees. And so these are some things that addiction does to us. But of course, this video doesn't talk about some of the things it can do to our relationships. Right? It doesn't mention lying to loved ones in order to hide the addiction. It doesn't mention the illegal activity, maybe stealing from loved ones to support that high. It doesn't mention maybe the shame involved and the secrecy that comes along with oftentimes being an addict. So the famous last words of an addict, I can stop anytime I want to. Is it true? No. Right? Not necessarily. Now, can an addict break an addiction? Yes, they certainly can. And we've even heard about some of that already today. But it's important for us to understand it's going to take time, it's going to take work, and it's probably going to take help from other people. So there's this great rule that a doctor came up with, Dr. Annette Bosworth, and she calls it the 3 3s rule. And it goes like this. If you're going to break an addiction, it takes 3 days of acute withdrawal, right? That's when you're going to experience those ugly symptoms. That's when things are probably going to be really rough and really difficult. After that, during the first 3 months, addicts are the most susceptible to relapse. So during those first 3 months, they're going to really have to be careful about not relapsing into this addiction. And then it takes 3 years for the brain to heal fully for us to be able to experience that natural euphoric high again. So think about some of those things you mentioned, shopping, roller coasters, video games. It might take 3 years for that to really start to feel good again, like it used to. It takes our brains time to heal. But can our brains heal? Yes, definitely. Your brain can heal. Your brain is an amazing thing, and you are an amazing person who is capable of healing from an addiction, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be easy. And so there is this 3 3s rule. So before any age, but especially before the age of 21, too much alcohol or any other addictive drug causes the hippocampi in the brain to stop growing. Now, when are your brains fully matured? 25. But the hippocampi in our brains That's something that really continues to produce and to produce new neurons throughout our life, right? And it's something that is not really supposed to stop like the rest of our brain is. But oftentimes when we introduce an addictive substance, especially at that young age, it's going to stop the hippocampi from doing what it should. So here's a picture of the hippocampus, and there are two of them in our brains. And the length of the hippocampus, it determines how much leadership ability that we have. The two hippocampi are responsible for leadership ability, new memory, and regulating moods. So here's the question. If, because of an addictive substance, our hippocampi are no longer growing and producing these neurons, what consequences might that have? If you can't form new memory, if you don't have leadership ability, and if you're not able to regulate your moods, is that going to have an impact on your life? Yeah. You know, here's the scary thing. With the use of addictive substances such as alcohol, cocaine, yes, even marijuana, or heroin, or other addictive substances, the hippocampi swell and stop growing. A brain injury can also cause this to happen. Remember I said addiction changes our brain, right? And here we're starting to see that addictions can actually do damage that is comparable to me falling down and busting my head on this stage, right? That's pretty significant. It literally makes a part of our brain stop growing. It changes our brain. Now, if I'm not able to, let's say, regulate my mood, what consequences might that have? Relationship problems. Good. What's that? Irrational thought, yes. Depression, yes. You know, it could get me into all kinds of trouble. What if I don't have that leadership ability? What problems might that have in my life? Okay, job issues, career issues, family issues. And you know, sometimes when we think about leadership, we think about maybe some big CEO leading a company, but maybe it's just leadership of yourself. Your own ability to control yourself and your own actions are going to be affected. And that third one, what about the ability to store new memories? Is that going to cause issues? Yeah. It's going to be harder to learn, harder to do well in school, harder to do well in your career. Well, again, can your brain heal from this? Yes, but it does take time. The hippocampi do not start growing again until 6 months after you stop using an addictive substance. So it's going to take 6 months for them to start growing again. But it gets a little bit more complicated when you look at this. For every year of substance use, the hippocampi need 2 years without substance use to heal and to catch up. And then we talked about that 3 years to begin to feel the natural euphoric high. So addiction changes your brain, and it takes time for your brain to heal from that. So 6 months before it starts growing, and 2 years for it to really fully catch up and heal. And that is 2 years for every year of substance use. So, are there any things we could do to maybe help our brains heal a little bit better, or a little bit faster? Yeah, get plenty of sleep. What else? Healthy diet.
Replace the behavior of using the drugs with something else like exercise.
Yeah, something positive, definitely. Yeah, and exercise is a huge one. You know, basically these things that help us to be healthier individuals, right? Getting a good diet, getting enough rest, getting exercise, you know, having good relationships around you. Now, who does an addiction hurt? Okay, everyone. Give me a couple examples, though. Who are some different people that, if I'm addicted, who are some people that might be affected? Okay, your family, your parents, yourself. Who else? Friends, neighbors, children. What about future children? Do you think future children could be affected? They definitely can be. So I want to talk to you about this idea of, especially, you know, if a woman, a girl is pregnant and she's addicted during that time, you know, that can have major consequences on the child. Now remember we talked about it takes 6 months for the hippocampi to start growing again. Now, what was the hippocampi responsible for? 3 things: leadership ability, new memory, regulating moods. Do you think those things are important for a 6-month-old? Yeah. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and the first 6 months of her life were a whirlwind, right? Constantly developing, constantly learning new things. That's one of the most, intensive times of their development is during those first years of their life. But yet, if they can't store new memory, if they can't, have this normal brain development, it's going to cause some major issues. And it can cause a whole bunch of different things. A lot of times we talk about a child that is born with fetal alcohol syndrome. That is this idea of a mother who has been an alcoholic while she was pregnant with this child. And it really has an impact on the infant. That 6 months of delayed growth, it causes critical damage to the brain. And it stops the ability for them to learn even some basic skills. And it can take years for them to catch up and heal. And so it's going to have major issues. Here's some facts about this, about children who are born with fetal alcohol syndrome. It can cause poor growth while the baby is in the womb and after they're born. It causes decreased muscle tone and poor coordination, delayed development, and problems in 3 or more major areas. Areas like thinking, speech, movement, social skills. It can cause heart defects. There can even be problems physically with the child. You can sometimes even look at a child's face and realize that the mother had an addiction. Now, these are 2 brains. Both are from 6-week-old babies. This one is normal, healthy. This one is a baby who was born with fetal alcohol syndrome, whose mother was addicted to alcohol. Literally changes your brain, right? You can see right there in front of you the impact that this can have, not just on you, but on other people. And this is why we really need to think about these things that we're putting in our bodies, or these things that maybe we're just dabbling with, right? Maybe it's just something we're curious about. We think it's no big deal. We might say everyone else is doing it. But the reality is it can affect you and your future family. Sorry, I'll play that in a moment, but we have a video here that is going to transition us a little bit. We've been talking about addiction in general, and now we're going to focus in a little bit on addiction to pornography and how that is a real thing and a serious thing. So this video is going to explain a little bit of it, and we'll discuss more after this video plays.
Sexual tastes vary from person to person, but with the current pornography epidemic, as some call it, one has to wonder how exactly this may affect our desires and perception of sexuality. Moreover, how does it affect our sex lives? Pornography constitutes about 25% requests and is the 4th most common reason people give for going on the internet. And while it may seem to simply facilitate an instinctual sexual response linked to millions of years of evolution, the truth is pornography has dynamically changed over time, ultimately molding our tastes and desires. The not-so-shocking truth is that pornography has profound consequences for the brain and acts in many ways like a drug. With prolonged exposure, your tolerance is increased, and many often find themselves addicted. Though it's not a physical substance, it leads to the same general loss of control, the compulsiveness to seek out the activity despite negative consequences, and withdrawal when it goes away, much like that of gambling or running, for example. The issue is that continued exposure can cause long-term or even lifelong neuroplastic change in the brain. Dopamine is released as a reward whenever we accomplish something, whether it be eating to sustain life or sexual activity to produce future life. And this dopamine consolidates neural connections in order to drive us to perform the same activity in the future. In other words, it alters and forms the brain cells to motivate certain actions. It rewires your brain. The National Institutes of Health measure drug addictiveness by testing rats. The rat is trained to press a button in order to get a drug, and the harder it works indicates how addictive the substance is. It turns out that the more addictive a drug is, the more dopamine we see released. And while there is, unfortunately, no rat porn that we can give to them, we do know that dopamine is also released during sexual excitement, which pornography plays right into. The more time you spend doing it, the more dopamine gets released, which reinforces the behavior and makes you not only desire it in the future, but require it. And as you begin to imagine these images away from the computer or while having sex, they become reinforced. Furthermore, each orgasm releases even more dopamine, which consolidates the connections made during the session. It's a feedback loop that becomes harder to escape. And just like a drug, your tolerance for visual stimulation has now compounded, making it more difficult to be turned on by reality. Pornography addiction can often lead to finding your mate less attractive. The good news is, it doesn't have to be permanent. Usually when people understand the mechanism and realize it's affecting their relationships, they can stop. The brain is often described as a use it or lose it system because the neural connections you stimulate grow stronger and desire to be activated, while the ones you ignore become weakened. Much like your muscles, which, if sitting still all day, itch for activity, but after prolonged non-use, they become complacent. Luckily, because of this use it or lose it brain, the same neuroplastic system that proliferates these habits can also be used to acquire healthier ones. Got a burning question you want answered? Ask it in the comments or on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe for more weekly science videos.
All right, so give me a little bit of feedback. What are some things you learned from that one?
Just like a drug. Addiction, you need more.
Yeah,
Worse.
it is just like a drug. And a lot of times we dismiss it because, we think, well, it's not really a drug, it's not really a substance. But what's happening is when we view pornography and we have that orgasm and there are all those things associated with it, our brains are producing those chemicals. Chemicals that our bodies say, you know what, that feels pretty good. And I think I want to go back to it. And so our brains, like it showed, get caught in this loop. Anything else? Yeah. 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 Yeah, it does. It molds that taste and desire so that, you have this expectation in your mind of what sex is supposed to be like, what women or what men are supposed to look like, what they're supposed to do, the things that are normal. It changes the way you view sex. Yeah. Yeah, very often. And yeah, so, a lot of times it does cause people to maybe do things that they wouldn't have normally done. And that is something that we'll be talking about a little bit more in a moment. But there is this reality that it can have an effect on you. So that's why we need to think about these things. We need to be able to make these wise decisions for our sake, but also for our future family. Now, as we move on here, it's important to understand what pornography addiction is. So here's a definition. It is a physical dependence. It is a habit forming where the substance is explicit sexual material. So if you had another addiction, say a heroin addiction, that would be the substance. If you were addicted to alcohol, that would be the substance. For a pornography addiction, it is porn is the substance. In 2011, the American Society of Addiction Medicine changed its definition of addiction to include sexual addiction. A lot of times young people are kind of thinking, well, that doesn't sound too bad, right? That's maybe the best kind of addiction, right? I'm a sex addict. It maybe has this cool ring to it. But the reality is it can be just as damaging as these other addictions that we talk about and we think about, especially for those of us whose brain is still developing, for students who are under this age of 25, and especially 12 to 17-year-olds. So, what are some different things that porn use does? Well, just like with any other drug, the addict is going to try and get that same high that they had at one point. They're going to go back to that feeling of euphoria, but it's going to be harder and harder for them to achieve that. So dopamine release is going to decline over time, and their body's going to say, you know what, we've got to find more. So maybe we'll view porn longer, or we'll look for more extreme things. Pleasure declines. Even sexual desire declines. We all kind of chuckled at the little scene where, You know, there's the blurred out stick figure that says, "Honey, I'm naked," and he goes, "Yeah, yeah." But the reality is that happens to people because what they're training their brain to be addicted to is not sex necessarily, and not necessarily sex in a loving, committed relationship, but they're training their brains to be addicted to porn. Porn is what gives them that sense of euphoria. Right? Porn is the thing that they want to keep going back to, not necessarily sex itself. And so this desire for more pleasure seeking oftentimes leads to what we might call more hardcore forms of pornography. And so the addict is going to up the dose, right? You know, I want that same feeling, so I'm going to do what it takes to get to that. And so porn becomes the drug of choice, and it can lead to other addictive behaviors. It can lead to issues, legal issues like stealing, maybe to pay for prostitutes. Because maybe the porn addict says, you know what, I'm tired of viewing this on a screen. I want to find someone who will do what I'm seeing on the screen. And so they'll go to prostitutes. Binge drinking often comes with it to give them courage to actually act out. Sometimes it leads to unexplained anger, promiscuous sex, and sexually transmitted diseases. It can lead to deviant sexual behavior, things like rape, child molestation, incest, and even murder. See, oftentimes, when people are viewing porn, they think it's no big deal, right? It's just me, by myself, no one's getting hurt, I'm watching, two consenting adults or whatever, and, we say it's not a big deal. But sometimes it leads to much worse things. And that's why we say porn can sometimes be a gateway drug to criminal behaviors. Why? Because the addict is no longer getting that same high from pornography alone. So they want to up the dose. And they're going to do what they can to fix that urge, just like any other addiction. So here's a video of Ted Bundy, who a serial killer and did a lot of horrible things. And you're going to see what his connection was with pornography and how that played in to some of his criminal activity.
I grew up in a wonderful home with two dedicated and loving parents, one of 5 brothers and sisters. A home where we as children were the focus of my parents' lives, where we regularly attended church, 2 Christian parents who did not drink, they did not smoke, there was no gambling, there was no physical abuse and fighting in the home. Basically, I was a normal person. I wasn't some guy hanging out at bars or in bum. I wasn't a pervert in the sense that, people look at somebody and say, I know there's something wrong with them, you just tell. I mean, I was essentially a normal person. I had good friends. I led a normal life, except for this one small but very potent and very destructive segment of it that I kept very secret, very close to myself, and didn't let anybody know about it. And part of the shock and horror for my dear friends and family years ago when I was first arrested was that there was no clue. They looked at me and they looked at the all-American boy. And it happened in stages, gradually. It doesn't necessarily, not to me at least, happen overnight. My experience with, I'd say, pornography generally, but with pornography that deals on a violent level with the sexuality, is that once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement, until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far. You reach that jumping off point where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it. Listen, I'm no social scientist, and I haven't done a survey. I mean, I don't pretend that I know what John Q. Citizen thinks about this. But I've lived in prison for a long time now. And I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography. There's no question about it. The FBI's own study on serial homicide shows that the most common interest among serial killers is pornography. Those of us who have been so much influenced by violence in the media, in particular pornographic violence, are not some kinds of inherent monsters. We are your sons and we are your husbands. And we grew up in regular families. And pornography can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today. It snatched me out of my home. It snatched me out of my home 20, 30 years ago. And as diligent as my parents were, and they were diligent in protecting their children, and as good a Christian home as we had, and we had a wonderful Christian home, there is no protection against the kinds of influences that are loose in the society that tolerates.
So, does everyone who view pornography become that? No. But do you always know how far it's going to take you? Do you always know where it's going to go? No. And a lot of times, again, people, they have this idea that it's just something innocent, right? It's just something I'm doing. It's no big deal. It's not going to cause any issues. And people don't realize that they can get hooked on this. They can get addicted. And it can lead to people doing things that they would have never have done. To being participants in things that, under a normal situation, they would have never thought possible. See, pornography can affect us in so many different ways, just like any other addiction. It can affect our marriage or maybe a future marriage. A porn addict becomes someone who is a taker, not a giver. That means it's all about me. Do what I want, do what pleases me. It's not about you. It's not about the other person. They become selfish. They can cheat on their spouse, and even if they don't physically cheat on their spouse, oftentimes their spouses feel as if they've been cheated on. There's that same emotional betrayal. And it can be very difficult to have a normal, healthy, and intimate relationship. We discussed a moment ago about our desires and preferences get changed when we view pornography. And so that if you're married and you have a wife or a husband, maybe they're not as attractive to you as they once were because your preferences, your tastes have been formed by viewing all these different things. So pornography, it really offers nothing good. In fact, it teaches us lies. It teaches us things that are untrue. And these lies, they especially are about women. Now, we could probably say, men in each of these as well, but I think what often happens is, women maybe believe these lies about themselves when they view pornography. So here are some of these lies. It can teach us that women are less than human. They're just something to give me pleasure. That women are a sport. They're property. That a woman's value depends on the attractiveness of her body. You're not valuable because of who you are, because of the person you are inside. You're valuable because of how sexy you are. That's what porn sometimes teaches us. And it can even teach us things like women like rape, that no means yes, which is typical in many porn scenes. And a lot of porn becomes very, very violent, and a lot of times people turn to more violent forms of pornography because, again, they're trying to up that dose. They're trying to get that same high once again. And so it can teach us that really it's not a big deal, right? Women like these things. And it even comes into the common culture, with movies like 50 Shades of Grey, which give us this idea that that it's really all just fun and women enjoy being abused and used, but the reality is they don't. Maybe in the beginning, and maybe it's something that they've gone to, maybe even because of something like pornography, but the reality is it leaves people being abused, feeling trapped, and being commodities, not really people. So here's some statistics about porn. 83% of porn addicts are men. That does not mean that women are not affected. There are women who are affected, maybe even women here who are affected, and there are probably men here who are affected. Both men and women are affected, but the majority of porn addicts are going to be men. 56% of divorces involve one spouse with a porn addiction. The largest group of online users of porn are ages 12 to 17. Remember, you guys are all high school students? That's your age. Due to advanced pornography use, more boys, ages 12 to 17, may be diagnosed with EDD, erectile dysfunction disorder. And cigarettes and alcohol may also contribute to this. So EDD is something that maybe you've seen a commercial for it on TV and you think, oh, that's something for old people, right? You know, old people have this issue. But porn is actually making it so boys, ages 12 to 17, are not able to have an erection because they viewed so much porn, and they are developing this disorder. Now, porn is an addiction just like many other addictions, but there are also some differences between a pornography addiction and what we might say is a more normal addiction. The brain's prefrontal cortex snaps a picture of whatever you are looking at when you have sexual release, and it stores that picture in your memory. So a porn addict is going to have numerous pictures stored in their brain, and that's going to be the thing that they come back to. Even if someone is successful in overcoming the addiction of porn, the pictures will still be in his or her brain. Now that doesn't mean, you know, they're always going to be that trigger, or they're always going to be as powerful. Our brains can heal, but it takes time, right? It takes some work. Teens and children viewing porn can cause permanent damage to their neural structure and the function of their developing brains. Their brain is altered. Their brain is changed. Just like with any other addiction, that 3-3 rule still applies. You know, there can be those 3 days of acute withdrawal, those 3 months in which you're most susceptible to relapse, and 3 years of brain healing to feel that natural euphoric high again, instead of feeling that high from pornography. So here's the bottom line. Porn hurts everyone. Hurts you, hurts the people around you. A community with pornography is not a safe place for women and children. Pornography is destructive, right? It changes the way that we view people, that we treat others. It affects everyone in society. And pornography is incredibly damaging. It isolates people, and it creates selfishness, secrecy, and shame. Porn creates loneliness, not love and friendship. Pornography turns bodies into commodities for sale and sex into a spectator event for entertainment. You know, instead of pornography being something that, instead of sex being something that could be wonderful and good and beautiful between you and someone you love, it simply becomes a sport. The people become commodities. They're people who can be used. And so pornography has a lot of issues. Now, here's maybe a little bit of good news. The Hilton recently removed having pornography in their hotels. And the reason for this is, people were realizing that it has an effect, right? It has a danger on society. There are issues involved with it. And so, a lot of people work together, and there were a lot of complaints. So with this change, they're making their hotels safer for people. Now, how can porn do damage to society? Well, porn oftentimes leads to human trafficking. Well, not oftentimes. Porn always does. It leads to human trafficking. Modern slavery, which leads to a market for the enslavement and use of young girls and guys. Here's one of the things that, when I first thought about it, it totally changed the way I thought about pornography. When you are watching something online, we generally think, oh, these are just two people who are getting paid and they probably love their job. And, you know, especially maybe as a high school boy, you think they've got the best job in the world, right? You know, they get to have sex all the time. The reality is you might be watching two people who are enslaved. You might be watching two people who might not even be over 18. You might be watching people your age, children who have been trafficked into this, who had no choice. You might be watching people who are only doing it because they need to get their fix of whatever drug they are using. And so pornography creates this market for the enslavement of people. And there's really no way to know. You can't, just go online and say, I'm only going to watch, the legitimate porn. You don't know when you're going online if those people are there because they want to or not. You could be watching people who have been enslaved. So how does pornography lead to human trafficking? Well, here's a chart, and I believe you have a spot on your paper where you could doodle this on there if you'd like to. It starts with a porn user. They create a market for human trafficking. They are creating that market, they're creating that demand. And very often it can lead to abused children. Abused and neglected children are often the result of addiction. The dad, the guy, the girl, whoever it is who's hooked on pornography is a lot more likely to become an abuser of his or her own or other people's children. And this can oftentimes lead to abused children running away. In fact, very often people and children are running away because of abuse. Now, 1/3 of all runaway children are going to be rescued by sex traffickers. They're going to be told, that they're going to maybe have a better life or something like that. But they are going to think that they're being rescued from this by these people who are, in reality, just pimps. These pimps supply the talent for porn users and producers. They're going to feed into that market, whether we're talking about something like prostitution or whether we're talking about something like pornography. And then Johns, which is, of course, a term for people who maybe will go and use a prostitute, who buy people for sex. They are going to be buying this from boys and girls, people who have been trafficked into this industry. The only way to stop the use and abuse of people is to dry up the demand. This is something that we can play a part in stopping by saying we're not going to view this stuff. We're not going to create a demand. We are not going to participate in a market that enslaves, hurts, and abuses people. So how can we do that? Well, we can educate people on the dangers of this. We can talk to people about the real issues of pornography and addiction and all that can lead to. Healthy future families do not do drugs. They do not use porn. They protect their precious spouse and children from those who do. So the reality is you can always start fresh. If you're here and you're not engaging with any addictive substance or pornography, don't. Right? There's never a good reason to get involved with that stuff. If you are involved with an addiction, seek help. You can get over this. You are someone who can move beyond this. It's going to take work and it's probably going to take help, but it is something that you can do. So please make wise decisions for your current and future family. You can leave a legacy to be proud of. And so if you have been affected by any of these things, I would encourage you to go forward and to make wise decisions. Thank you for allowing me to present this information, and I hope you will all go and make a wonderful future for yourselves.